What happens when a young global icon, known for grace and restraint, walks onto a daytime television stage expecting warmth, and instead finds herself face to face with a question that cuts too close to the bone. The lights of the View burned brighter than usual that morning, reflecting off the polished table, the camera lenses, the expectant eyes of the audience who had no idea they were about to witness a moment that would ripple far beyond the studio walls. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was the beginning of something raw, uncomfortable, and unforgettable. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to Talk Flair right now. Hit that like button and drop a comment as you're watching, because moments like this don't come around often, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Zendaya stepped onto the set with the poise the world had come to associate with her. Her smile was practiced but genuine, the kind that had carried her through red carpets, award shows, and interviews since she was barely a teenager. The applause swelled as she waved, her eyes scanning the crowd briefly, absorbing the energy. Inside, though, her chest felt tight. She always felt it before interviews like this. Not fear, she'd faced bigger stages, but awareness. The awareness that words mattered here, that narratives could shift in seconds, that a single exchange could become a headline before the commercial break ended. Sunny Hostin leaned forward slightly as introductions wrapped up, her expression calm, inquisitive, almost inviting. The conversation began softly, predictably. Zendaya spoke about her latest project, her voice warm, measured. She talked about storytelling, about responsibility, about how art could reflect pain and hope at the same time. The audience nodded along. The other hosts smiled, chimed in with light laughter. For a brief moment, everything unfolded exactly as expected. But Sunny's eyes didn't leave Zendaya's face. There was something sharpening behind them, something more pointed than curiosity. When she spoke again, her tone shifted just enough to be felt, not yet heard. She referenced Zendaya's recent comments about Hollywood pressure, about growing up in the spotlight, about choosing roles carefully. Then came the pause. The kind that stretches a second into something heavier. "You've said," Sunny began carefully, "that you felt misunderstood when people criticized your choices. But some would argue that with the platform you have, you owe more clarity. Don't you think staying neutral sometimes sends the wrong message?" The studio seemed to inhale all at once. Zendaya's smile didn't disappear, but it froze. Inside her, a rush of memories collided. Interviews where her words were twisted. Headlines that reduced nuance to outrage. Nights staring at her phone, wondering how honesty could feel so dangerous. She took a breath, slow and deliberate. "I don't believe in neutrality when it comes to humanity," she replied evenly. "But I also believe in speaking when I'm informed, not pressured." Sunny nodded, but she didn't back off. But silence can be interpreted as comfort with the status quo. For young fans watching you, isn't that a risk? A murmur rippled through the audience. Zendaya felt heat rise in her chest, not anger yet, but something closer to hurt. She glanced briefly at the crowd, then back at Sunny. Her voice remained calm, but a tremor lived just beneath it. "I don't think it's fair to define someone's values by the moments they choose not to perform them publicly," she said. "I've spent my whole life being watched. Sometimes protecting my peace is how I survive." The words landed harder than she expected. One of the hosts shifted in her chair. The cameras zoomed in closer. Sunny's lips pressed together, then parted again. "But isn't that privilege?" Sunny asked. "To step back when others can't." This time, Zendaya didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Her hands rested folded in her lap, fingers tightening slightly. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. She remembered being 14, thrust into adult conversations before she fully understood them. She remembered being praised for maturity when all she wanted was room to grow. "I don't see my humanity as privilege," Zendaya said finally, her voice softer now. "I see it as necessity." The audience reacted audibly, some applause, some gasps. The tension was no longer subtle. It sat openly between them, undeniable. Sunny leaned back, her expression serious, unyielding. "But public figures influence culture," she pressed. "Whether they want to or not." Zendaya nodded slowly. "And culture influences public figures. That relationship isn't one-directional." Her eyes glistened for just a moment before she blinked it away. She hadn't planned to feel this exposed. The studio lights felt harsher now, less flattering. She could sense millions of viewers leaning in, ready to judge not just her words, but her worth. Sunny's next question came quicker, sharper. "So when fans feel disappointed, when they say you let them down, What do you say to them? That did it. The composure cracked, not dramatically, but enough to be seen. Zendaya inhaled deeply, her shoulders rising and falling. Her voice, when it came, carried weight. I say I'm human, she said. And I'm learning. Just like they are. The room went quiet. No laughter. No side comments. Just the hum of cameras and the collective awareness that something intimate had been pulled into the open. Zendaya swallowed, emotion pressing behind her ribs. She hadn't expected to defend her humanity on a couch meant for conversation, not confrontation. Sunny held her gaze, her own expression unreadable. For a fleeting second, it felt less like an interview and more like a courtroom. Questions, expectations, judgment hanging heavy in the air. Zendaya straightened slightly, reclaiming space. I don't exist to meet every expectation, she added, firmer now. I exist to grow, to care, and to do the best I can with what I know at the time. Applause broke out, louder this time, mixed with scattered cheers. The energy shifted again, unstable, electric. Zendaya exhaled, though her heart was still racing. She knew this moment would travel far beyond this room. She could already see the headlines forming, the clips circulating, the opinions hardening. As the segment edged toward its first break, the tension remained unresolved, suspended like a held breath. Zendaya offered a small, composed smile to the camera, but inside, she felt shaken, exposed, and strangely relieved. She had spoken her truth, even if it cost her comfort. And somewhere beyond the studio, screens flickered, fingers hovered over keyboards, and a cultural conversation quietly ignited, waiting to explode once the cameras rolled again. The red light blinked off as the show cut to commercial, but the tension didn't fade with it. If anything, it thickened. Zendaya sat back against the couch, maintaining her composed posture while her mind raced faster than the cameras ever could. The applause that had followed her last words still echoed faintly in her ears, but it didn't comfort her. Applause could be fleeting. Headlines were forever. Sunny Hostin reached for her mug, her movements controlled, deliberate. She hadn't expected the exchange to land the way it had, not with that weight, not with that visible reaction from the audience. Around them, producers hovered just outside the frame, whispering into headsets, eyes darting between monitors and the women seated at the table. This wasn't what had been outlined in the pre-show notes. This was bigger. Zendaya stared straight ahead, her reflection faintly visible in the glossy surface of the table. She reminded herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She had done this before. She had survived worse. Yet something about this felt different. This wasn't a snide comment from a stranger online or a faceless opinion buried in a thread. This was happening live, in front of an audience that trusted the show to guide how they interpreted her. One of the hosts leaned slightly toward her, offering a gentle smile, the kind meant to reassure without words. Zendaya returned it, grateful but still guarded. She could feel emotion pressing at the edges of her control, like water behind a dam. She told herself not to let it spill. Not yet. The countdown began. 5 seconds. 4. 3. The red light snapped back on. Sunny turned toward Zendaya again, her expression softened but still intent. We're back, she said smoothly, as if the air hadn't been charged moments before. And Zendaya, I want to continue this conversation because I think it's important. Zendaya nodded, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Sunny continued, you talk about humanity, about growth. But when you're elevated to the status you're at now, people project their hopes onto you. Do you feel responsible for that? The question landed heavy, not accusatory on the surface, but loaded beneath. Zendaya felt the familiar pressure of being everything to everyone. She glanced briefly at the audience, saw faces intent, some sympathetic, some skeptical. I feel responsible for my actions, she said carefully. Not for projections I didn't create. Sunny raised an eyebrow. But you benefit from those projections. A ripple went through the crowd. Zendaya felt it in her chest. This was the line, the invisible one between conversation and confrontation. She could either retreat into safe, polished answers or step forward into something riskier, something real. I benefit from opportunity, she replied, her voice steady but firm. And I try to use that opportunity thoughtfully. But I won't accept the idea that I'm obligated to perform pain or politics on demand to prove I care. One of the hosts inhaled sharply. Another shifted in her seat. The audience murmured again, louder this time. Sunny leaned in, elbows on the table now. No one is asking you to perform pain, she said. They're asking for clarity. Zendaya felt her pulse quicken. Her hands unclasped, then folded again, a subtle tell she knew the cameras might catch. Clarity isn't always loud, she said. And it's not always immediate. Her voice softened, emotion threading through the words now. I grew up being told to smile, to be agreeable, to not rock the boat. Every time I speak, I weigh not just what I believe, but how it will be twisted. That's not clarity. That's survival. The room stilled. Even Sunny seemed to pause, absorbing the weight of that admission. For a moment, the exchange lost its edge and became something more intimate, more uncomfortable. But doesn't that fear, Sunny asked, quieter now, keep you from fully stepping into your power? Zendaya's eyes glistened again. This time, she didn't blink it away immediately. She felt the sting behind her eyes, the familiar burn of emotion she rarely let the world see. Her voice, when it came, was raw. My power, she said, comes from knowing who I am when the cameras are off. Not from proving it here. The audience erupted, applause, cheers, even a few people rising slightly from their seats. The sound washed over the set, a wave of support that made Zendaya's shoulders relax just a fraction. She exhaled slowly. Sunny nodded, but her expression remained complex. I respect that, she said. But I also think public discourse demands courage. Zendaya met her gaze directly now. Courage looks different on different people. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy, reflective. The kind of pause that makes everyone aware they're witnessing something unscripted. Something real. A producer's voice crackled faintly through an earpiece. The show was running long. The conversation had taken on a life of its own. Sunny straightened, clearly recalibrating. Let me ask you this, she said. Do you ever worry that by holding back, you're letting others define your narrative for you? Zendaya's lips curved into a small, sad smile. They already do, she said. Every day. Her honesty hung in the air. She could feel the audience leaning toward her now, not as spectators of drama, but as witnesses to vulnerability. She felt exposed and oddly lighter for it. I've learned, she continued, that I can't control the narrative. I can only control my integrity. For the first time since the exchange began, Sunny didn't immediately respond. She studied Zendaya, really looked at her. Not as a symbol, not as a headline, but as a young woman navigating impossible expectations. That's fair, Sunny said finally. The words didn't resolve everything. They didn't erase the tension or the underlying disagreement. But they shifted the tone, just enough to signal a turning point. Zendaya nodded, gratitude flickering across her face. She knew this moment would be dissected, slowed down, replayed. She knew some would see strength, others defiance. She couldn't control that, but she could own what she'd said. As the segment wound down, the hosts transitioned awkwardly to the next topic, but the energy never fully reset. The audience remained charged, whispering among themselves, eyes darting back to Zendaya as if afraid she might disappear if they looked away. When the cameras finally cut again, Zendaya leaned back, her breath shaky now that the adrenaline was fading. She felt drained, but also resolute. Whatever came next, whatever headlines were written, she knew she hadn't betrayed herself. And outside the studio, unseen but already stirring, social media feeds began to light up, fingers flying, opinions colliding, the first sparks of a firestorm quietly igniting. When the cameras shut off for the second break, the room exhaled in fragments. There was no collective sigh of relief, no easy laughter to reset the mood. Instead, conversations started in hushed pockets. Crew members leaned toward one another, whispering urgently. Audience members shifted in their seats, some shaking their heads, others nodding as if they'd just witnessed something that echoed their own unspoken frustrations. Zendaya remained seated, hands resting lightly on her knees now, no longer folded in defense. Her heartbeat was still loud, but it had slowed enough for her thoughts to catch up. She felt the emotional residue clinging to her skin, a mixture of vulnerability and resolve. This was never how she imagined this interview would go. She had prepared for questions about film, fashion, philanthropy. She had not prepared to lay pieces of her inner life bare under studio lights. Sunny Hostin glanced down at her notes, then back up at Zendaya. There was a subtle shift in her posture. Less confrontational now, more contemplative. She took a sip of water, her brow faintly furrowed, as if replaying the last few minutes in her mind. The exchange hadn't gone the way she'd anticipated either. She believed in accountability, in pushing public figures to engage. But she hadn't expected the conversation to crack open something so personal. A producer stepped closer, murmuring something to Sunny, gesturing briefly toward the clock. Time was slipping. The show had to move forward. Yet everyone in that space knew they were sitting inside a moment that had already escaped the confines of the studio. The red light blinked on once more. Sunny turned toward Zendaya, her voice measured, deliberate. "Zendaya," she began, "I want to acknowledge something before we continue. This conversation clearly touches on very real pressure. And I don't think anyone here doubts your sincerity." Zendaya nodded slowly, her eyes attentive but guarded. She appreciated the shift, but she'd learned not to relax too quickly. Sunny continued, "But I also want to explore the emotional toll you mentioned. Growing up in the public eye. How has that shaped the way you respond to criticism now?" The question felt less like an accusation and more like an invitation. Zendaya felt a flicker of relief, though the weight in her chest remained. "It made me hyper-aware," she said. "Of myself. Of others. Of how quickly love can turn into disappointment." She paused, choosing her words carefully. When you're young, you think if you're good enough, kind enough, careful enough, people won't turn on you. And then you realize they still might. Her voice wavered slightly, just enough for the audience to feel it. A hush settled over the room. "So now," she went on, "I move slower. I speak when I feel grounded. Because I've learned that reacting to every demand doesn't protect you. It erodes you." One of the hosts nodded quietly. Another pressed her lips together, visibly moved. Sunny listened intently. Her earlier edge softened into something closer to empathy. "But doesn't that distance," Sunny asked gently, "create a gap between you and the people who look up to you?" Zendaya considered that. She felt the familiar push and pull of expectation versus self-preservation. "It can," she admitted. "And I wrestle with that. I don't want to be unreachable. I just don't want to disappear trying to be everything." The audience murmured in agreement. Someone in the front row wiped at their eyes. The cameras lingered on Zendaya's face, capturing the honesty etched into every line of expression. Sunny leaned back slightly, folding her hands. "I hear that," she said. "And I think a lot of people watching see themselves in what you're describing, even if their scale is different." Zendaya's shoulders relaxed a little. She hadn't expected validation. It surprised her how much it mattered. "But," Sunny added, and the room tensed again, "I also think there's frustration when voices with reach choose restraint in moments that feel urgent." Zendaya nodded. She didn't flinch this time. "I understand that frustration," she said. "I feel it too. About myself." Her admission caught the room off guard. She continued before doubt could creep in. "There are nights I replay things I didn't say. Moments I wonder if silence was the right choice. But I also know that speaking from fear doesn't help anyone." Sunny studied her, then asked quietly, "Do you ever worry people see that as weakness?" Zendaya's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "All the time," she said. "Especially in women." That single sentence sent a visible ripple through the audience. Applause rose, not thunderous but heartfelt, layered with recognition. Zendaya felt it wash over her, grounding her. "I've been praised for being composed since I was a kid," she continued. "But composure isn't the absence of feeling. It's often the result of carrying too much." The studio was completely still now. Even the hosts seemed momentarily unsure how to respond. The conversation had moved beyond debate into something more reflective, more intimate. Sunny broke the silence. "That's a powerful distinction," she said. Zendaya nodded, grateful but still emotionally exposed. She could feel the vulnerability lingering, raw and undeniable. As the segment edged toward its close, Sunny offered one final question. "If you could say something directly to the people who feel disappointed by you," she asked, "what would it be?" Zendaya didn't hesitate this time. "I would say I'm listening," she said. "And I hope they listen to me too, not as an idea, but as a person." Her voice was steady now, conviction replacing uncertainty. "I'm not perfect. I'm present. And I'm trying." The audience rose in applause, louder and more unified than before. Zendaya blinked rapidly, emotion welling despite her efforts to contain it. She pressed her lips together, nodding in thanks. Sunny smiled, genuine this time. "Thank you for that honesty," she said. As the cameras pulled back and the show transitioned toward its final moments, the tension shifted into something unresolved but respectful. No clear winner. No neat conclusion. Just a conversation laid bare, messy and human. Zendaya leaned back as the lights dimmed slightly, her heart still pounding but her spirit steadier. She knew the real impact of this moment wouldn't be measured in applause or airtime. It would be measured in reactions yet to come, in tweets, clips, debates, and think pieces already forming in real time. And somewhere beyond the studio walls, the conversation was about to explode. The applause was still echoing when the cameras finally cut for the last time, but it no longer felt like a conclusion. It felt like a release. The kind that comes after something heavy has been said out loud, something that can't be taken back. Zendaya sat there for a moment longer than necessary, hands resting on the arm of the chair, eyes lowered as if grounding herself before standing up again. Around her, the studio began to loosen. Hosts exhaled, crew members moved more freely, conversations started all at once. Sunny Hostin removed her microphone and glanced toward Zendaya. There was no triumph in her expression, no defensiveness either. Just thoughtfulness. She stood, stepped closer, and extended a hand. "Thank you for staying in it," Sunny said quietly, away from the microphones. Zendaya looked up, surprised. She took Sunny's hand, her grip firm but calm. "Thank you for listening," she replied. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation in a neat, televised sense. But it was something real. And that mattered. As Zendaya walked off the set, applause followed her again, this time unprompted, organic. Members of the audience stood, some clapping softly, others wiping at their eyes. She smiled, small and genuine, and gave a brief nod. She didn't feel victorious. She felt spent, but she also felt lighter than she had walking in. Backstage, the energy was buzzing. Phones were already out. Producers whispered urgently, eyes wide as they scrolled. Clips were spreading faster than anyone could track. Quotes were being pulled, frozen into bold white text against paused frames of Zendaya's face. "I don't exist to meet every expectation. Clarity isn't always loud. Composure is often the result of carrying too much." Within minutes, the internet fractured into camps. Some praised her restraint, calling her words brave, overdue, necessary. Others criticized her, accusing her of deflection, of not doing enough. Think pieces began to form in real time. Was Zendaya redefining celebrity accountability, or avoiding it? Was Sunny holding her to a standard, or crossing a line? On social media, fans defended her fiercely. They shared clips with captions about burnout, about the cost of being watched, about how often young women are asked to be symbols before they're allowed to be human. Others replayed Sunny's questions, arguing they reflected frustrations many people felt, but rarely voiced so directly. The moment no longer belonged to the studio. It belonged to everyone watching. Zendaya sat in her car as it pulled away from the building, her phone buzzing relentlessly beside her. She didn't look at it right away. She stared out the window instead, city reflections sliding across the glass. She thought about her younger self, the girl who learned early how to speak carefully, how to smile through pressure. She wondered what that girl would think of today. When she finally picked up her phone, she didn't scroll. She sent one message to her mother, "I'm okay." Across town, Sunny sat in her office long after the show had ended, watching the clip again, not as a host, but as a viewer. She replayed the pauses, the moments where Zendaya's voice softened, the sentence that lingered the longest, "I'm not perfect. I'm present." Sunny leaned back in her chair. She knew the backlash would come, for both of them. But she also knew something important had happened. A conversation that refused to stay shallow. A moment that forced people to sit with discomfort instead of applause lines. By evening, news outlets had picked it up. Headlines varied wildly, each framing the clash through a different lens. Zendaya pushes back on the view. Sunny Hostin sparks emotional exchange. A rare, raw daytime TV moment. No two stories agreed on what it meant, but none could ignore it. And that was the point. Late that night, clips continued to circulate, stitched together, debated, defended. In comment sections, strangers argued, shared personal stories, thanked Zendaya for saying what they couldn't. Others challenged her, demanding more. The conversation refused to settle. Somewhere between praise and criticism, something deeper had been exposed. The impossible expectations placed on public figures, the hunger for clarity in chaotic times, the thin line between accountability and erasure. Zendaya didn't post a statement. She didn't clarify, didn't backtrack, didn't amplify. She let the moment stand as it was, messy, emotional, unfinished. And maybe that was what stunned people the most. Because in a world trained to demand clean answers, she offered something harder to digest. Honesty without performance, vulnerability without spectacle, strength without shouting. Now it's your turn. What do you think about that moment? Was Zendaya right to protect her humanity, Or should public figures always meet the expectations placed on them? Did Sunny push necessary accountability or cross an emotional line? Drop your opinion in the comments. This conversation doesn't end here. And if you want more explosive cinematic stories like this, moments that pull you inside the tension, the emotion, the aftermath, make sure you subscribe to Talk Flair right now. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and stay with us, because the next story might be even bigger.